the season finale of Dark Side of the Ringway, the steroid trials. First of all, I thought just going back and reading all about this trial of late, I could not fathom how they were going to do this in a 1 hour slot. Like, you were asking, was this a 2-parter? And I checked and it was like, it's the one part. I thought they did a pretty great job of trying to take so much, like, you could easily, this is the ultimate, you could get a season out of this story. And they had 44 minutes to tell a lot of different stories. And I thought they did a pretty good job of getting the key information across and what the story was. I thought that was going to be the biggest challenge in a 1 hour format.
Let me preface by saying, like, I'm somebody who kind of is aware of the story, but doesn't really know the ins and outs and the details. So much like many of the topics covered on Dark Side of the Ring, I was kind of relying on this show to really give me like a very good overview of what everything that had happened. And from my perspective, I certainly felt like it was pretty comprehensive, and that by the end of it, I feel like I have a pretty good understanding of the entire situation. But I'm certainly more curious about, your thoughts as somebody who has kind of studied all of this and knows a lot more about what to expect going in.
Yeah, I mean, it was interesting to see like who was going to make themselves available for this, because, obviously you're not going to get a Vince McMahon as part of this. But to be quite honest, Vince McMahon, I think everybody looks at would be, like the ultimate coup. And from a name perspective, of course, he would be great for all of this. I would definitely question how great his memory would be and his recall of so many of these little facts. That Jerry McDevitt, I find like he was going to be the most compelling figure in this. And I thought that was a great get on their part. And I can understand from Jerry McDevitt's point of view that, yes, I will gladly have a 1 hour victory lap that I'm going to take, and just the confidence that this man exuded in his and listen, they did a great job here. The prosecution, which Sean O'Shea, who was the lead prosecutor, in essence, there were 3 charges facing Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation. It was 2 counts of possession of steroids with the intent to distribute, with the 2 counts being distributing towards Hulk Hogan. And they had these 2 dates of April 13th and October 24th of 1989 that they had to prove the distribution. And where those fell apart is that this was done, this case was overseen in the Eastern District of New York, and they had to tie this case to these steroids being distributed at the Nassau Coliseum. Now, if I was just to tell you about October 24th at the Nassau Coliseum, and you don't believe anything I tell you, like, would you fact check that? What would you do?
I would fact check. What do you mean? Yeah.
What I'm saying is there was no event at the Nassau Coliseum on either of those dates.
Okay.
So they get thrown out, and I don't know how it gets so far that you can't prove the venue of where this distribution took place. You had the prosecution trying to prove the case that the steroids were taken by this driver from Titan Towers to give to Hulk Hogan at the Nassau Coliseum. The problem being that the dates did not line up and you couldn't prove it. So that gets thrown out. And then the prosecution is tasked with proving conspiracy. And it's a fascinating story.
Now, part of the issue, at least as I understand it from the documentary, is the fact that this trial took place in Eastern New York.
In the Eastern District of New York,
in the Eastern District,
which is where
the
Nassau Coliseum, that is where it is.
So they had to find a crime in that area.
Exactly. Yes.
And how did this end up in the Eastern District of New York and not Connecticut or elsewhere?
So it's a great question how it ends up in this specific district where George Zahorian was obtaining the steroids. It was from a pharmaceutical company in the Eastern District, but they also were tying it to like the notes that had been taken, like the prosecution. Their 2 main witnesses were Terry Bollea, which we actually talked about on the WrestleMania review this week, that ultimately was not very favorable towards the prosecution. It actually was greatly beneficial to Vince McMahon. The other key witness was Emily Feinberg, who was the executive assistant to Vince McMahon and oversaw a lot of, like, they had this refrigerator in their office, and she maintained like the steroids that came in, and she was tasked with getting steroids to Hulk Hogan, and she kept all of these notes. But it fell apart because the dates did not correspond of obtaining these steroids, and then this Nassau Coliseum show that needed to be proven that these steroids were distributed to Hulk Hogan on this date. They could not prove it. So those two counts are thrown out, and they're left with the conspiracy charge of, if Vince McMahon and the World Wrestling Federation were conspiring against the government, and what they had to prove in this point was the idea that George Zahorian and Vince McMahon were conspiring together, and they were not able to prove that. The way George Zahorian gets into this entire picture is that he is the appointed doctor by the Pennsylvania State Athletic Commission. So the WWF would run there every 3 weeks in Hershey, and they'd have an assigned doctor, and he was the assigned doctor, and he quickly gained a rep as the guy you could go to, and you could just get whatever you want from this guy. I mean, you would come out with these brown paper bags full of whatever you want. And he gets sentenced in 1991. And just going back, there was this act that was passed where it then put the impetus on the company to hire these doctors in Pennsylvania. So the WWF was ready to hire George Zahorian under their own jurisdiction. And it's then when Linda McMahon gets tipped off about this information that Zahorian is under investigation, that they never officially hire him for a show under their watch, which might have been the difference. If they had hired him, there would have been that paper trail, and you would have been able to connect the dots. Like, Vince McMahon is going to George Zahorian for his own steroids. It's like the guy, there's no question here of the talent that was on steroids, that there was knowledge of it, that George Zahorian was supplying these performers, some of them at least, in the case of Hulk Hogan, with steroids, but they were never able to make that connection to prove a conspiracy, which takes, there's 4 different ways you can do it. They were not able to, and the jury ends up finding McMahon and the company not guilty. That's a very Cole's Notes version of the story.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, it was quite fascinating. And I would say, for me, being able to hear so much from the journalists involved at the time was one of the things that to me stood out. The amount of, I think, excellent journalism that probably took place to preserve this story throughout history. And I think going on to show perhaps the WWE's very contentious relationship with those journalists as well, I thought was really well showcased throughout this.
Yeah, I was really glad that they had, the likes of Wade Keller and Dave Meltzer featured in this, that were there covering it. Like, their coverage was tremendous at the time, and they're going to have an understanding far greater than your local Long Island reporter that's been assigned to cover this case, that doesn't understand professional wrestling, does not understand Vince McMahon. Like, there is a very, quite honestly, Sean O'Shea would have greatly benefited from an understanding of this industry further, just in terms of the personalities involved. And I mean, it really is a failing, the fact that it got so far, and it was proving the venue of a show that did not even exist on the date that is in question here, that it got as far as it did. How did you feel Jerry McDevitt came across?
Incredibly confident. We have to understand, this is a show, Dark Side of the Ring, who has not been very kind, I would say, to the legacy of the WWE and the legacy of Vince McMahon itself. So I think Jerry McDevitt probably expected to be going into enemy territory with, letting Dark Side of the Ring give that edit. And he even agreeing to do something like this, I think, shows you how confident he is in the story being favorable to him and to the WWE. And the end result was, I would say this was an episode that I think painted a picture of, Vince McMahon and the WWE being justifiably found innocent, I suppose, if under those specific charges, and I suppose also quite the victory for McDivitt under very low low chance of success chances.
Yeah, it's certainly, like, you can see, like, this is one of Vince McMahon. I think what he views as one of his great achievements in life that you hear about from those that have been around him. Like, this was a defining part of his legacy, was winning this case. And I think it makes it all the more interesting that if we do get this United States of America versus Vince McMahon miniseries, if that ever, finds a home, a television home, and gets produced, I think you're going to see a much different presentation of this in terms of Vince McMahon, the underdog, taking on the big bad government. Like, that is going to be his passion project. I think he looks at this trial as a defining part of his career.
Well, just to know what Vince McMahon might have been like behind closed doors, how he would have acted within, like, seeing, like, maybe a young Stephanie McMahon crying and Jerry McDivitt giving her that sort of, like, pep talk, like everything's going to be okay. Like, I want to definitely see a dramatization of everything that might have been going on with this set of characters. That sounds really exciting. But also the Netflix documentary about McMahon, how will they frame all of this and that?
They have to cover this. Like, this is a major part of the Vince McMahon story. This trial that lasts for just around 3 weeks. I was interested to see, like, who all would be out there, because a lot of these names, like, I could not tell you what they are up to now. Like George Zahorian he's still alive. He's still out there. But you also have to look at people that are like, are you going to be volunteering for kind of an expose on what you are most famously attached to, and not for the right reasons as well. Emily Feinberg is somebody that, I mean, she was, like, after this period, I mean, you don't really hear of, like, what she has done afterwards, like in her post WWF life. But I thought Game McDivitt, that was a pretty key one to get as well. And I thought that it was a pretty... it becomes very difficult to take so many of these different turns and stories attached to this. Like, the fact that they got into the Martin Bergman story, for those that have not seen it. So the WWF is represented in this case by Jerry McDivitt and Laura Bravetti. Those are the two defense lawyers for the company and for Vince McMahon himself, both being charged. And Martin Bergman is this individual. He's the brother of Lowell Bergman, who was a producer at 60 Minutes, and his profile, like, he is characterized by Al Pacino in The Insider. And Martin Bergman was going around to all these people, including Emily Feinberg, and in the piece, Phil Mushnick, who's interviewed in this as well, he was approached, and it's Bergman just trying to, like, essentially pump information and get all of this information out. And it was only, like, I want to say it was like 93 or so, maybe a bit later than that. Anyway, it comes out, he's married to Laura Bravetti. Like, this is just like soap opera stuff, that this guy who was going around trying to get all this information turned out to be the secret husband of Laura Bravetti, who is representing Vince McMahon in this trial. And there was great resistance here by McDivitt at even the insinuation that there was any kind of witness tampering or anything underhanded in the tactics. And I linked to it in the piece I wrote about today. You can watch, like, Vince McMahon went on WWF television in the New York market and just gave this scathing depiction of the journalists that are trying to paint Marty Bergman as anything kind of as this underhanded fixer, for lack of a better term.
Can you explain this to me? So he just decided, oh, okay, like, my name is being tarnished in the public. I'm going to use my airtime in this market to deliver a personal message. I'm going to drop a diss track on my own show to these wrestling journalists. Is that what
he called them yellow journalism, the yellow journalists.
What a fascinating man. I mean, like, I would say most CEOs would probably, I don't know, let this stuff play out. Maybe send a press release, perhaps. Maybe a memo on his behalf. This felt very much like Mr. McMahon, that character coming out and speaking and cutting a promo on the people that have wronged him. And just to kind of see this footage pop up, I'm like, how did this happen? How did this man decide to deliver this very kind of, I don't know, ugly message through such a beautifully lit TV studio? And I mean, he's an interesting man, I guess.
So there you go. There's a lot that you can take away from this episode. And I guess the next question is about Dark Side of the Ring. Like, we always ask this at the end of each season, like if they will continue here. You certainly get the impression that Vice TV would love to see this series just continue onward and onward.
You kidding me? They want to multiply this thing. Like, anything you can make a dark side of the 2000s, dark side of the 70s.
They ran a 13-hour marathon in the lead up to this season finale on Thursday. Like, it was interesting that Evan Husney had stated, like, Dark Side of the Ring, one of the things is, like, Vice TV rather, like, they just want different subjects covered. That's why they're kind of averse to the two-parters. Mm-hmm. They just want as many subjects and 1 hours as they can get. So I think that's kind of what they push for. I just wonder, like, after 3 seasons, it's like, this is a monumental task, like, for that team to go through. Like, this episode alone was, like, I can't imagine the hours behind just an episode like this and the amount of research for such a complex topic.
I mean, it is 3 seasons, but it's really 4. Like, this third season felt like twice the length. So they have a great a body of work under their belt. I will say, as a fan, I've certainly heard a lot less buzz in these last few episodes. And I don't know if that's because, like, man, wrestling fans just have so much else to watch these days, or if it's just, like, maybe the lowered interest in some of the topics that have been covered. But nonetheless, I'm sure if you're Vice, even if these episodes weren't the highest rated, they're probably still doing really well amongst your channel, and you'd probably want it to continue for as long as the producers are able to.
Yeah, for Vice, these are very strong. This is also, like, the first time they've also put them in that they've run in the fall. So, I mean, you are talking about a more competitive period when, I mean, we talk about the competition is out there, but the numbers have been down for this back half of the third season. We didn't get a number yet for last night's episode, but, last week's XPW one was 109,000, just looking at it here. Canyon was, like, the big one for this block of episodes.
Interesting.